All right. Hey, Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So
Happy to be here.
So Chris is a 40-year-old Air Canada pilot who has continued to fly for Air Canada throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. And today we're going to talk to him about what it's been like to fly through the pandemic and also about his road to Air Canada through Afghanistan and the Congo. I believe that's correct. Is that right?
More or less. So it's mainly in when it comes to Africa, Sudan, and a few other places.
All right, my mistake. Cool. So where are you right now?
I'm at home in Bracebridge, Ontario.
Bracebridge, Ontario. That's in Muskoka, is it not?
It is.
Beautiful place. Cool. And you grew up there?
I grew up here, yeah, and decided to stay here after I got hired by Air Canada and do the drive. It's about an hour and a half drive to work.
Wow, that's quite the commute.
Yeah.
Cool. So you fly for Air Canada, and what do you fly now? What airplane are you in?
I'm on the 320, Airbus 320, and based out of Toronto.
Cool. And you're captain of that airplane or first officer?
First officer.
Right on. Cool. How long you been flying for Air Canada?
I got hired April 2018, so coming up to 3 years.
Oh, wow. Cool. Right on. So let's go back, I don't know, you said you're 40 years old, so I'm guessing we're going to go back about 15 or 20 years, and why don't you tell me, when did you start flying? Do you remember your first flight?
I do remember maybe not my first flight. I remember I decided to do the pilot thing. I guess it was 2006, and I'd done a bunch of stuff. I got to university and did some traveling after that, and I was trying to figure out what to do for a career. And flying was something that always had interested me. So I was 26 when I decided to go chase that. And I started there was just a small school in Bracebridge at the Muskoka Airport, and started to fly there. But then I realized in order to really pursue it as a career, I need to go to a bigger school. And then after a couple months, did an original ground school in Bracebridge, but then went to a school in North Bay called the Congo Flight Center that just offered more training and more consistent training. So I moved there and did their commercial pilot program, and went from just a handful of hours to commercial pilot license instructor rating in about a year in North Bay.
Oh wow, and then, that's quite accelerated.
Yeah, it was pretty quick. And then I was hired there as an instructor when I finished my instructor rating, and I was there until the spring. So I got my commercial rating and instructor rating the fall of 2007, and I was there until the spring of 2007 as an instructor. Spring of 2008, right. And then I got a job out in Squamish, BC, which is I was kind of looking for. I liked the instructing thing, but I was looking for something to accelerate my experience or varied experience, and there they offered sightseeing flights, and they had contracts for various things like fire spotting. So it was a good mix of things that was offered there.
Right. And so let's just go back to your instructor rating for a sec here. So before you got your commercial license, did you did a multi-IFR rating before you got your commercial license, or when did you get your multi rating and your IFR rating?
The timeline, I can't remember exactly, but it was about the same time that I finished my instructor rating. I did it all. I think I had my multi and IFR before I finished my commercial license.
Right.
And I think, because I think I might have done my commercial flight test in the multi, but I could be wrong on that. That was a long time ago now.
Right. Cool.
And I remember it being just the whole multi thing being just a whirlwind because you don't have a lot of time in it, and you don't have it's expensive, and so Yeah, it was a bit of a whirlwind for sure.
Cool. And so, about how many instructing hours do you have? Like, could you guess? Like,
I would. Well, because when I moved out into Squamish, it was such a mix of flying that I did have a number of students. So I've spent hours and hours in the circuit. I don't know, but I'm guessing maybe like 500 hours instructing.
All right.
I was flying a lot, or maybe a bit more even. I was flying a lot out in Squamish. It was only there during the summers. In the winters, I'd drive back to Ontario and work construction, and then go back out for. So I did 2 summers out there. But we were flying. I was flying 120 hours a month or so out there in the summers.
So I'm guessing the aviation industry was a little bit tough back in 2008.
It was, yeah. I remember looking at. That's always a thing in aviation. Is it wasn't moving very quickly. You needed like 300 hours to get, or 3,000 hours to get a multi, or like a right seat job in a Navajo or something like that. Like it was tough.
So you were out at Glacier Air, that's correct, and they're in Squamish.
Yes, in Squamish. Yeah. So, it's kind of where I feel like I really learned to fly, because it just is a varied type of flying, and really got to experience a bunch of new things. And being in it was all Cessna, single engine, piston flying, but at the same time, there was just a lot of new experiences. And when you don't have an experience to back up, like use, you're just kind of figuring things out, and gaining confidence as you go. So it was a steep learning curve out there with the mountains coming from Ontario. I was doing a lot of flying into like outfitter camps up in the Chilcotins. So suddenly landing on gravel strips that weren't level, that were just all kinds of things I hadn't done before, and just being as cautious as I could and build confidence as I went. So it was a lot of fun too. Just the people out there were amazing. So, but it wasn't a place that after a couple of summers, I was really starting to look for IFR situation, something that I could build experience on, and I was hired out here back in Bracebridge out of Muskoka for Medevac company on a Pilatus. So I started there in the right seat, and it was a Ontario government contract. So in order to be in the left seat, you needed to have your ATPL already. So that took a while to get. I think I was there for a year before I went to the left seat. I needed like 1,500 hours and all the ATPL stuff, even though technically it's not required on that aircraft. It was just the contract that required it. And I did about a year in the left seat, flying medevac, which was a lot of fun. It was like all times of the day, all kinds of different places, flying as far west as Winnipeg, and we had flying as far east. Sometimes it's Nova Scotia. Doing all our own flight planning. There was no such thing as a dispatch or anything. So we, it was really getting down into the, making sure, especially in the winters, that the weather was okay. Coming up with plan Bs, where to go if you couldn't get in somewhere, pick up a patient, and it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. And then when I was there for about 2 years, in 2012, I got hired by Voyager Airways, which is a company based out of North Bay.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, they're based out of North Bay. But at the time, most of their contracts were overseas, in a lot of the United Nations contracts or supporting the NATO mission in Afghanistan. So got hired by them. There at the time they were flying -7s, -8s, RJs. Right now I think they're down to -8s and RJs. The -7s aren't flying anymore. But it was a company that I was always aware of because when I was in North Bay, And I'd always kind of wanted to do the overseas thing. That was kind of my goal. So getting there was a big step for me. And I got hired at first to be in the right seat of the Dash 8. I spent 6 months in the right seat. And then my next recurrent sim, I got moved to the left seat and was suddenly flying the captain on a Dash 8, which was a big step. And then, spent almost 3 years in the Dash 8, mostly in Afghanistan. So based out of Kandahar airfield. And the schedule was mostly 2 months on, 2 months off, but I was, sometimes I'd extend and do almost 4 months. Sometimes I'd only have like a month off. So it was kind of a mixed bag, but it was overall just an incredible experience. I was also in Sudan there for the odd rotation. So in Darfur, which is also quite we can get into that.
Cool. I'd like to. So, but tell me a little bit about Afghanistan, like what that was like. I can't imagine it would have been, it'd be a pretty far cry from Squamish and Glacier Air and the BC mountains.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I remember my first time. Landing in Afghanistan in Kandahar at the military base, and that was my first place they sent me after my training. And I didn't know anybody. I remember going into the main building there, getting checked in. It was just surreal. And one of the mechanics, he'd pick me up to take me to accommodation, and on the way there was a rocket attack on the base, and that was the alarms were going off, and suddenly we're in a bunker, and I was like, okay, that was a bit of an eye opener, and I was pretty green at the time, so I didn't know what to think of the whole situation. But I guess the biggest thing to take away from it from the 3 years there was that because of the security pass requirements, there wasn't a lot of rotation in crew, and the crew that we had there was like just incredible. When you're in a place like that, stuck in a military base with a bunch of guys for that amount of time, you just build a lot of relationships, and it was just a lot of good memories, some hard times as well, but it was pretty incredible. It's also a bit of a surreal experience being in a war zone as a contractor, because we're not necessarily right on the front lines. We're kind of separated from the military, where it's I don't know how to exactly explain it, but it was just a weird time. And at the time, you got the Kandahar airfield was a population of like 35,000 people, I think.
Oh, right.
So it was a big place. There was like soccer fields, football fields, basketball courts. There's a boardwalk that surrounded it all with all kinds of shops and restaurants, and it was kind of a mix between feeling like you're in like Star Wars in like the cantina, or sometimes Spaceballs with the merchandising. Like you buy stuffed animals for kids back home that were embroidered with was the Operation Enduring Freedom and those kind of things. So it was surreal.
So were you ever shot at, or did you ever have to have an escort, like off the field or anything like that while flying?
Well, there was always for a while there was regular reports of small arms fire at aircraft that were on final. We had fairly regular rocket attacks on the base, and some of them hit fairly close. Most of them didn't. At first it was kind of scary, but after spending so much time there, you kind of get used to it, and they're not scary anymore, and it's not an issue anymore. So you kind of get accustomed to this new situation where, there are people out there trying to hurt you. There was one, so that was it. There was a few ground attacks, where you have to spend time in locked door rooms as you could hear the attacks, the gunfire going off, and those kind of things. But yeah, those kind of things were just kind of everyday life. It became kind of normal.
So do you have any PTSD or anything from that, or how are you doing these days?
Yeah, I think I'm doing fine.
Okay,
yeah.
So from Afghanistan, then you started doing some flying in the Sudan, then, right? And that was for the same company, Glacier Airways.
The same company at Sudan. I was there on the Dash 8 at first, and I transferred over to the RJ for a couple of years, and I was also based mainly in the Sudan. But Sudan was actually it was just a really strange place compared to Afghanistan. Afghanistan, it was like the NATO military machine. It was very structured. And then working in Sudan on a UN contract, the flying was maybe not as interesting, doesn't have the mountains, but at the same time, just the lifestyle was a lot more interesting and frustrating at the same time, because air traffic control, like for instance in Afghanistan, was run by mostly Americans, and it was all very structured and well laid out. Once you're in a place like Sudan, it's all done by Sudanese, and understanding air traffic control, understanding why, I don't know how to put it exactly, but it was just not very efficient. So that's where I really.
They speak French in the Sudan? Is it?
No, Arabic.
Oh, really?
Yeah. No, it's Arabic. Huh. Yeah. So it's, and so that's where the cultures collide too. So like they're like flight planning. In order to do a flight plan, you had to, for most places, you had to walk up into to the tower, talk to the air traffic controller, fill out a handwritten flight plan, and you had to be respectful. You had to be, handle all in a certain way, because people got very easily offended. There was cases where guys, got frustrated with the delays, especially in the heat. It's like you're doing all this in 42, 43 degree heat.
Sure.
And there's just a politics involved with the job, is the best way I could say it. So sometimes just waiting for passengers from the UN for 3 hours, sitting on the tarmac and just and wondering why this day is dragging on so long.
Yeah.
And you just had to be patient and be ready to fly when it was time to fly.
So you, was it all like paved runways, or did you fly into any gravel runways or anything like that over there?
On the Dash 8, yeah, there's a couple gravel runways we flew on the Dash 8.
Mm-hmm.
And, too bad I can't show you pictures and stuff, but it was a bit surreal as well, because this one spot constantly had animals on the runway. I think at one point my record was like 7 or 8 go-arounds all in the same approach, just going in circles, because every time we flew an approach, there'd be more animals on the runway. There was
like what kind of animals?
Also like goats, cows, donkeys. Like there was one particular time I remember, like this one town had half the town on one side of the runway and half the town on the other, pretty much, and people would use the runway to just cross to the other side of the town. And I remember being like on short final at one point, and just as we were touching down, these 2 kids on a donkey started crossing the runway, and we didn't have time to go around at that point, so we just had to. I just started braking as hard as I could. And the kids saw me just as we were touching down, saw me. They jumped off the donkey and tried to pull it off the runway. Except the donkey panicked and just dug its feet in and just didn't want to move. The other kid ran around the back and started pushing from behind while one kid was pulling. And they just kind of literally dragged it to the edge of the runway as we were kind of going by. And it was those kind of things that we had to deal with.
What was the weather like?
Semi-regularly. And Sudan was, most of the time it's dry. It's like sub-Sahara. It was
clear skies.
It was dry, dusty, clear skies, but then when you have the monsoons or rainy season, I guess that comes, and at those times you're dealing with dust storms because the visibility is reduced quite a bit, and not necessarily flying in the rain a lot, but you have these thunderstorms that roll by, and even if they're like 20 kilometers away, they can kick up a dust storm. And then what they call haboob, where it's just a wall of sand, and that you see in like The Mummy or something. That suddenly the visibility can be down to literally zero. So certain times of the year, we always had to watch out for those and be prepared to go somewhere else suddenly if the visibility was down. So but weather-wise, for the most part in Africa, we didn't have to deal with too much. It was, other than the dust storms, for the most part, it was okay. Also then you fly into places like Khartoum, which is the capital city of Sudan, and there, due to dust storms and pollution stuff, the visibility for a good portion of the year it was reduced. Yeah.
Wow, what a crazy experience for sure. Quite the journey so far. So after that, flying in the Sudan and in Afghanistan, then did you did a little flying in Europe too, didn't you? Somewhere you were in Sweden or something like that.
Yeah, I did. I was so my last year, I was at Voyager for almost 6 years, and in the last year that I was there, there was a contract in Sweden for a regional airline. They wanted to get it. They were flying like twin turboprops, but I guess they wanted to get into flying jets, and Voyager offered them to for a service to basically a wet lease for RJs, and we flew a schedule for them. And I was there for a year without doing rotational stuff. So that was, I was kind of, by that point, I was a little bit tired of the Africa stuff and wanted to be more, and I always wanted to experience Scandinavia. So that was a great opportunity to do that. So got to experience a whole summer there and an entire winter. And we were based basically at the Arctic Circle, like 100 kilometers south of the Arctic Circle, which so quite a bit north. So in the summer, we had 24-hour daylight. In the winter, there was almost 24-hour darkness. And but it's not like northern Sweden is not like northern Canada here, because there they have a lot more established communities. Like the town we were in was a city of like 50,000 people, or 70,000 people, and it was. They had a university. I think Facebook has a European headquarters there. And so it was a really established city, nice restaurants, nice outdoor activities. And especially in the winter they had a 10-kilometer skating track around the town. And cross-country skiing and everything. It was great.
So at this point, I guess you'd been flying in Afghanistan, flying in the Sudan, and now you're over in Sweden. You're still flying with Voyager Airways, and somewhere on the line there, I think you found yourself in a relationship and started to settle down. So it seems like maybe you didn't really want the 2 months on, 2 months off over in Africa or the Middle East or whatnot, and you wanted to kind of settle down a little bit. So you applied to Air Canada. Would that be correct?
That's pretty much the story. Yeah, I met my wife in Afghanistan, actually, in Canada. She's from Macedonia. She was working for an American company there. And so she moved to Canada, and we got married and everything. So, but then she was also working at Voyager. We were working together in Sweden that entire year. So we were kind of.
She's a pilot too?
So we were looking at starting to. No, she was working in Afghanistan in administration and stuff, and then she was working as a flight attendant at Voyager. So
okay, cool.
And then we're looking at starting a family, looking at what the next move would be. It was fun bouncing around all over the world, but it was at the same time looking to settle down and get to a more normal life.
Sure.
So we were even considering me doing my license conversion to a European license,
right?
Because we really do like Europe, and and I have a German passport, so it would have been easy for me to work there. But at the same time, I had applied to Air Canada, and while we were in Sweden, I'd gotten a call from Air Canada for an interview, and so I flew back to Canada for a week and did the interview, and then came back to Sweden, and a few weeks later, Air Canada called for offer me a job.
So I want to know a little bit about the application process. And so about how many hours did you have when you applied to Air Canada?
I think I had, somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 hours when I got hired.
Cool. And so you had to go in for an interview, and how long did the entire process take from, I don't know, the time that I guess your application was accepted to the time you started training?
I think I got the call for the interview. So like we works there, Canada, there's an online profile. So I had my application in there, or my profile in for, I can't remember how long. I think I had updated it a few months before I got the call for an interview.
All right.
So I think it was pretty quick, because for some people it takes a while. Other times it goes pretty quick. So it was a big hiring spree at the time. And I got the call for an interview. My interview was in, I want to say, beginning of February. And I started training my first day of training was, I think, April 4th or something like that. So a couple months.
Yeah, right. Yeah, not too bad at all. So you've been flying for Air Canada ever since, and you've been obviously flying throughout this pandemic as well. You were one of the ones that didn't lose your job.
So unfortunately, this whole pandemic started, because it's really unfortunate for the whole aviation industry, obviously. But I was touch and go there. Like when this started, we knew that the aviation industry was going to be affected, and I thought I was going to be one of the people to be laid off, because I'm still pretty junior after only being in Air Canada for a couple of years. So I was lucky enough not to get laid off. I feel bad for not just Air Canada pilots, but industry as a whole. Mm-hmm. People out of work, because I have a lot of friends that are out of work at this time. But so far I've been lucky, and I'm thankful for that. So it's as far as my personal feelings are, it's a constant back and forth, because before this started, the career trajectory was just, it was going crazy. Like all the airlines were hiring, the aviation industry was growing.
What's your workload been like with Air Canada over the pandemic here? You must be flying a little bit less than you were before the pandemic, but what were you at, like a 50% workload, or where were you at? It's difficult to judge because it changes a little bit from month to month, but I'm about flying about half the amount of days at work. Right. That I did before. Like before, my schedule would be like 15, 16 days a month. I'd be gone at work. And then now I'm flying maybe 8 days a month, 9 days a month. But also on top of that is the amount of flying has changed, because before I'd be flying many more legs a day or longer days. And now there's a lot. There's maybe like one flight a day a lot of the time, and it's just the days aren't as condensed or aren't as long as well. So it's a combination of those two things, right? But but on the plus side, I have a young daughter, so trying to be optimistic is get to spend a little more time with the family, because before I'd be gone a lot more, and I'm trying to make the most of it. And so you'd mostly fly, you're mostly like North American routes then, I guess, eh?
The 320, we fly North America and the Caribbean and Mexico and stuff. So that's the destinations for the 320. Huh. And
Cool. So, just start to maybe wrap up a little bit here. I got a few more questions for you. I just want to know, out of everything you told me here, all your jobs, which job was your favorite job? Do you have one that you really liked? I know you said you liked the medevac job and that was a lot of fun, but would that be at the top?
Well, see, when you asked me to do this, I was trying to think about this, and I don't know what would my favorite job be, because each one had its pluses and its minuses. Whether one was fun, but the other one paid more money. There's too many factors to take into account. I would say just the different experiences of each one. I've appreciated them,
right?
And the Voyager was still probably the most adventurous, so being overseas and doing all those things. But the downside of that, it was just not a very stable lifestyle. I didn't know where I was going to be from 1 month to the next, and difficult to make plans, difficult to have anything stable.
Would it be safe to say that every job offered a unique challenge?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Everything was a unique challenge, and everything really was a building block of experience to the next one. Right. So that's why when it comes to aviation, I would say getting varied amount of experience is really important. Like everybody has their own path, but because of the path that I took, I would say that it's the more varied experience you have, the better for down the road. Sure. And not just for aviation, not just for your flying experience, just for personal life experience as well.
For sure.
Because I almost some of the guys that I know at I work with, some say, they got lucky because they went to flight college and then got hired by maybe a regional airline like Jazz for a couple of years, and then got hired by Air Canada. So suddenly they're at Air Canada with like 3 or 4 years of flight experience. They're still fine as pilots, obviously. I'm not saying that, but I almost feel kind of bad for them in the case, because they miss out on a lot of world experience that they could have had if they had a different path.
So they went straight to the destination. There wasn't quite a journey. It was right. In aviation, I'm guessing what you're saying is enjoy the journey.
Yes, that's basically the message that I would like to bring across, is that and don't be fixated on, for somebody who's looking to get into aviation, don't be fixated on making it to the mainline airline, because enjoy the road getting there.
Sure thing.
And I think that's what gets lost, I think, in a lot of younger pilots coming up these days. Mm-hmm. So, but maybe one saving grace of the pandemic here might be that as aviation starts to recover, even though it's going to be more difficult to get to the big airlines for a while, probably there's going to be room there for people to have those experiences to get there.
Right. I understand.
Yeah.
So I got another question for you here. One that I like to ask. It's interesting. Have you ever had a forced approach?
Not really. Like there's one where, this is way back, where I was in North Bay before I went out to BC, and there was an airplane that had been sitting, as a 170, I want to say, tail dragger, and it had been sitting in all winter outside. And the owner said I could go fly it, and we brought it in the hangar overnight for it to kind of thaw out, because it was covered in snow and everything, and it did thaw out in the morning. We drained our tanks, drained the water out of the tanks. There was a bit of water, and I started up, and everything was fine. And
you did a run up, and everything was fine.
Everything was fine, and then as I took off, and as I was climbing out at maybe from North Bay, which is a 10,000-foot runway, all of a sudden the engine just kind of sputtered and quit. And I did it, just slowly turned back to the runway, it was a long runway, and landed in the opposite direction I took off in. And as I was on final, the engine picked up again. So it was definitely, with limited experience that I had, that was definitely a bit of a shock. And it turned out that there was still ice, frozen water in the tank. So what happened is that when we drained the water, some of it had thawed out, but there was like blocks of ice in the tank. It was like minus 20 out.
Right.
So it hadn't all thawed out. And then what we think happened is that as the water, or as the fuel was being pulled out of the tanks, the ice just kind of suctioned onto the inlets and blocked the fuel flow. And then that was the closest one. There was one other time where I was coming back from it was a pretty long flight in BC, and I was in a 206, and the engine just had a bunch of work done to it, and something happened to the engine. Blew piston rings or something like that. It had basically a new engine, and or one of the cylinders blew, and the piston rings. So it wasn't running very well. Temperatures going up, oil pressure going down, and I was losing oil. And I didn't have there. The choices were easy because I didn't have anywhere else to go. The closest runway was Squamish at that point, so I just kept on going there, and I landed, and it didn't have a lot of oil in it, and so turned out that there was something was faulty with one of the pistons, and there was a recall. It ended up being a recall, I think, on that part anyway. So it was
two fairly spicy situations.
Yeah, exactly. So that was, other than that, I've had a pretty uneventful, when it comes along those lines, pretty uneventful career. There hasn't been too many, a couple small problems here and there, but something that could always be rectified, that could always be figured out.
Well, lucky you. Careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
So, retirement plans, Chris. What do you think? You're gonna plan to fly for Air Canada for the remainder of your career and retire?
Well, that's the goal. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the goal, is to stay healthy and stay with Air Canada. Hopefully, the industry picks up here, and I haven't had much time to think about what to do in retirement. Still, 20 something years away at this point. But I guess the goal is just stay healthy, stay sharp, so that I can continue flying with Air Canada and have hopefully a long, uneventful career.
Cool.
This is the goal. And then,
if you could go back and change anything, would you do it all the same, or would you make any different choices along the way?
Well, I'm not sure I would change anything, just because maybe I was thinking about this question, but I don't think I would change anything, because just the way things work out is the way things work out. And if I hadn't done it the way I've done it, I wouldn't have a wife and a family and daughter that I have now, and those kind of things. So, but so I'm happy with how things had worked out. Decisions wise, I've made, some of them were more, I guess in hindsight, I wish sometimes my decisions were based on financial need rather than career path. So, I taking out a loan to do my flight training, all that stuff. So I was always mindful of having to pay that off. So I had to take jobs that would allow me to do that. Like I always wanted to fly floats up north and those kind of things. But it was, at the time, the industry wasn't really, you had to basically work for free for the first summer and those kind of things. So I might have done that if I wasn't required to pay the bills.
Right.
So sometimes my choices were forced on me, but in the end, looking back, I wouldn't have changed them either. Like, I'm glad the way it worked out.
Well, that's good news. Cool, man.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. Right on. Well, I know you got a few things to do today, so I'm not going to keep you. So thanks for talking to me today.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
Welcome. Pleasure I'm looking forward to seeing who else you get on.
Yeah, man. Cool. Right on. So again, Chris is a 40-year-old first officer for Air Canada. He's been flying for Air Canada for a couple of years. And just lucky to have you on the show. So thanks again, Chris.
Welcome. Talk soon.